Hey everybody, today we're going to be looking at a contemporary artist named Heather Gawler. And we say contemporary if they're working currently. They're an artist right now. So if we take a look at some of her work, and there was a video also in our playlist you can see how much color and pattern she uses in her work. Every inch of the artwork is covered with patterns and color. So we're going to set up a landscape and make a landscape full of patterns and color. And I'm going to say you should probably work fairly small for this project so that you don't end up making patterns forever. So I'm going to take a piece of paper and I'm actually going to fold it in half and only use half of the piece of paper for the patterning, because sometimes when we're working with patterns and textures, it can take a long time to fill it all in with color. So, so that your artwork doesn't take too long this week, I'm going to say use half of a piece of paper for this. Now, I was going to have you guys set up a horizon line, but I'm starting to think maybe that might be a little complicated for 3rd and 4th grade. So instead, we're going to make it a little bit simpler. We're going to start with a horizon line. So the horizon line is where the land meets the sky. It could be flat, it could be curvy, it could be mountainous. If you want it to be mountainous, what you would do first is make a horizontal line, and then you could do your mountains on top. So that's one way to do it if you wanted to have a mountainous scene. You still start with the horizon line here, and then you can build your mountains on it, and then your horizon line would end up being back here. I'm just going to go with a curvy line. So I'm going to come in with the curvy line, and now I'm going to divide up this land so that I can add lots of different patterns. And I'm going to divide it up by making some diagonal lines. So I'm going to basically find the center, and from the center I'm going to go out this way with the diagonal line and go over, and I'm going to continue with some diagonal lines. Now I'm going to go back in the center and move over a little bit and do a diagonal line out this way. So this is kind of giving the illusion that things are going back into space. Then we're going to divide these up a little bit any way you want to. I'm going to make maybe a diagonal line. I could make a horizontal line, just so that we have some areas to do some different kinds of patterning and create some variety. Okay, so we've got some lines in here. I think I'm going to do a sun in the distance. You could also do a barn, a house, some trees. I think I'll do the trees and the sun again. So for the sun, I'm just going to do a half of a circle, and then I'm going to have diagonal lines radiating out from that sun. And there's technical ways we can do it to create more of an illusion, but I usually start talking about that in older grades. I did my lines, my sun, before I did my trees. Whoops. So I'm going to want an oval here, and let's put another one over here. And then I'll just have to go ahead and erase some of those, the rays of the sun underneath, because I forgot to add them first. That's okay. Whenever we can create overlapping shapes in our artwork is going to get even more complex and interesting, because overlapping shapes create a sense of space or depth. And what I mean by that is, now we know that this tree is in front of those sun rays. Maybe that's not the best example because sun rays are everywhere, but for our drawing's sake. Okay, looks like the artist has this certain stylized way of making things very colorful, and let me get her work out again. Making her work very colorful, and when we say stylized, we mean that it's not trying to be realistic. She's created her own style of spirals in those trees that is not trying to be realistic. It's just trying to be something that we call folk art. And folk art is more from your heart. It's not, you're not professionally trained. It's just more whimsical. So we're gonna make some of those spiral trees. And I have my tree trunk here. And as always, whenever you do a tree trunk, you could always do a V, and then it ends up adding some interest to your tree. You can make your V shapes. And And then I'm going to come in and do some spiraling. So one fun way to do a tree. Another way is just to come up with some V's and make some branches with more V's. All right, that wasn't my best work, but that's okay. We will keep going. Now is the time we're going to make some patterns. What I would like you to do is, since we don't have a Sharpie, that would be ideal because that would be the best thing. We would just draw with this with Sharpie and then we could color it in. But since I didn't send home any Sharpies, what you're going to have to do is, I'm thinking, make some patterns with a regular pencil and then we can go over it later with the black. The black colored pencils you have are watercolor pencils. So if you do have a black pencil that's not a watercolor pencil, then that would be a great way for you to do this project. You could just start right away with the black non-watercolor. You can tell if it's watercolor because it'll have a golden paintbrush on it. So this one is watercolor, so if I add water, it'll turn into paint, and this one won't. So if you do have any colored pencils around, or any permanent markers like a Sharpie, then that would be great to use. These types of markers are gonna turn into water if you add any. So I have a non-watercolor pencil, and I'm gonna use that for my lines because Helen Galler uses a lot of black in her work, and it really sets off the colors and the patterns and makes them emphasized, more important. So if I have my black non-watercolor pencil, I don't have to worry about it turning into paint, and I can go over my designs or even start doing my designs in the black pencil to save some time. Oops, I went right through the trunk of my tree. I keep messing up on this one tree. Poor tree. I could go ahead and just color this tree in black also. And let's go ahead and make some patterns. So, what kind of patterns and textures could we make? Sometimes texture is how something looks like it feels, but it can also be a pattern. So I'm gonna start maybe with some stripes. I could do just some stripes here, coming up over the landscape. I could do a dotted line and a circle, dotted line, circle, dotted line, circle. There's so many different types of patterns we could create if you start thinking about different shapes and combining them together and repeating patterns. I could do some curvy lines in here. We could do some checkerboards in here by doing diagonal lines and then horizontal lines. Let's see what else we could do. We could do some zigzag lines. Now, oh, so important. Try not to make these patterns too small because you'll be here forever coloring them in. Like let's say I wanted to do some hearts. I'm gonna try to make the hearts big enough so that I'm gonna actually be able to color them and not make them these itty bitty little things that will just take too long to color in. So please try to make your designs big enough that it's not gonna get too tedious when you start to color them in. How about some wavy lines? Here we got wavy line, a repeated wavy line. Okay, there's some sections to color. All right, so once you get everything treated with some kind of pattern, then you are ready to start coloring in. Now, you could, here's a little trick. If you wanted to do a whole section, let's say I didn't want to go around all these circles because that would also be tedious. And tedious means something that you might get kind of bored doing. You might lose your interest doing it. It's repetitious, it takes a long time. So I could color the whole section orange, and then if I was gonna be using paint, I could add water and paint that section and let it dry. Or I'm just gonna go over it with a color that's a little darker. The red is a little darker than the orange, and I'm really pressing down to cover it up. And then when I come to paint that area, I could either go around all the circles or even just go through them, and the colors are close enough that we'll still see them. So you can either choose to add water or not. It's totally up to you. Let's try that again. So you could go ahead and cover the whole section with the color. And then you have a couple choices. You could do the circles in a different color now, or there's a little bit of orange on my brush still, so it made the blue become a little bit grayer. And that's something I use all the time in artwork. I gray out my colors because colors can be so bright when I'm doing landscapes. So anyways, we see how it might even be the black pencil mixing in there. It did gray it a little bit. That's okay. All right, we're gonna keep going with some colors here. We've got some greens. I like to sometimes use the side of my pencil like this when I'm coloring with the watercolor pencils, because I can cover the ground. I can get more colored more quickly. It's almost like you just put it down, pick it up like this, and then you can color with it. And while I have the green, maybe I'll come in here. Now I'm not gonna go ahead and color this whole thing and have you watch me, but you guys are going to go ahead and color the whole thing. Remember these tips that you can cover large areas using the side of the pencil. If you're adding water, you don't have to color them in all the way, because when you add the water, it will spread it all around and you don't need to fill in all the areas until you have your paintbrush. You don't have to paint this. You can just use colored pencils. You can use markers. What we're looking for this assignment is more patterns. And I know we did patterns last week with the pumpkin, so this is what we're working on: patterns and textures, repetition. And then you can either, like I said, add the water to turn it into paint, or you can just color it in. I'll have a time lapse of me coloring one in. Okay, good luck, boys and girls.